What's up, guys? It's Texas Workshop. In this video, I'm going to be installing a Hayward salt cell for my pool. Now, I know this is a lot different from my other videos that I do, but anytime I'm doing something that I think might help somebody else, I always try to make a video on it to help you guys out. So if you have a pool and you're trying to install one of these guys, I want to show you how to do it now. Now, if you're interested in buying one of these things, I'll put a link in the description where you can go buy one. And also too, I'm going to kind of go through the process of installing this thing. I'm going to show you how this thing works, and I'm going to take you outside and we're going to install all the parts into my pool. This guy, what we're going to do is we're going to wire it up 220. And to do it 220, if you look on here, it's this wiring diagram right here, and it comes from the factory, default from factory in this configuration. As you can tell right here, it's got a jumper between 2 and 3. We'll put line 1 to 1 and line 2 to 4. Now, if you don't know, anytime you run something at 220, you're using half the amp. So if you're wanting to save power and things like that, the 220 is the way to go on it. But if all you have is 110, you can definitely use this wiring diagram here to do that. Now, when you buy the kit, like I said, I'll put a link in the description if you're interested in getting one of these. It comes with the T-cell. This is the biggest one they had. It's the T-cell 15. It comes with this guy. It comes with a flow valve, which is this guy here. If you look, all it is a reed switch in there that when the water flows, it hits that switch and it tells this board that water is flowing. It's safe to cut on our T-cell. Comes with 2 unions. I'm not sure about if the smaller cells come with they both all come with a 2-inch or not, but this is actually 2-inch. All my plumbing on my pool is 1.5 inches, so I'm gonna have to do some reducers here to get this guy to work. And it's just basically screw on. It's just a quick connect for when you want to clean the cell and do different things. Mine also came with these 2 guys here. It's just a free chlorine checker and a salt check, which is pretty handy. Although this thing does do a readout of salt, so it'll give you a parts per million of the salt content when the thing's running. The other thing I got to get is I've got to get some salt. My pool is anywhere from 35 to 40,000 gallons of water. I'm probably going to buy 20 bags of salt, probably put about 15 of them in there, and then let it run for 4 or 5 hours and see what kind of reading I'm getting, and then I'll add accordingly after that. If you look at the actual cover panel here, you can see that the salt is designed to run between 2,700 and 3,400 parts per million. And normally when I run mine, I would try to get mine around 28, 29, 3,000, somewhere around in there, just as long as you're not over 3,400. If you get over 3,400, you can corrode metals and things like that, and it's not good for your pool. If it gets below 2,700, it won't generate anything. It actually shuts down the actual cell itself. To figure this out right here, I add blank pounds of salt to raise level 500 parts per million. The way you can do that is once you get everything up and running, it's been running for a couple of days, throw a bag of salt in there, and then after another day, get a reading on that and see what it brought your salt up to. And then one other thing I want to talk about right quick before we get started on outside is this is your first time with a salt pool. The one thing to know about salt is that if, say, you have your pool to the recommended amount here, and say you have to add water to your pool because there's been evaporation. Well, salt doesn't leave your pool through evaporation. Basically what will happen if there's evaporation in your pool, the salt is still there, which will increase your salinity of your parts per million here. So when you add water to that, you're basically just diluting it back down to whatever you had here. The only time you have to add salt to your pool is if you have to backwash or waste a lot of water for any apparent reason, and then you replenish that water. Well, then you've actually removed the salt, so you have to put salt back in. Hope that makes sense. If not, just remember that if you're losing water because of evaporation, you don't have to add salt back into it when you add water. If you're pumping a bunch of water out of your pool and throwing it in your drain or out in your yard or wherever, you will eventually have to add salt back to that to get it to whatever setting you had on it. If your pool's got galvanized piping, there's probably not many of them around, but there are some. You do not want to put one of these things in because you will eat that galvanized piping up very quickly. But anyways, what we're going to do now is we're going to go outside. I got to get some parts and some salt, and then we're going to install the cell, the flow switch, and I'm going to have to replumb some things, and then we're going to wire this guy up and get it all going. Alright, so you can see here, right here is my pump. That's the discharge from my pump. It's coming over to my filter. The water's being filtered and it's coming out this discharge here. And this is where we're going to install the salt cell and the flow switch. Now I'm just cutting this guy off not all the way up against that union, because you don't have to buy another one of those unions. They're not very cheap. Just give me enough room to where I can work once I get this guy cut off. And now I'm going to cut it off where it goes back to the jets going back to my pool. Now, one thing I want to show right here is if you can look at these elbows, they're very tight radiused. So which that means is it's basically a dead end and then it has a turn. These are not good for what we're trying to do here and to keep our flow. All that does is cause disturbances in the water and restricts flow. You want to use elbows that have a sweeping radius, and I'm fixing to show you one here in just a second what I'm talking about. The one like this right here is the best to use when trying to put this thing back together. You want as least resistance as possible. Now what I'm doing is basically just using some 220 grit sandpaper to just kind of break off all the burrs that were created by the saw. Now I'm installing the 1.5 to 2 inch reducer. I'm basically stepping it up to the size of the actual cell itself. One thing to note here too is that I'm actually dry fitting all this stuff together. Now I'm just cutting off about a 2 to 3 inch piece of pipe to where it can go from this 2-inch reducer up to our salt cell. Again, I'm just cleaning the parts off here with some sandpaper. Now we'll be putting in the salt cell, and basically what we're doing is we're just dry fitting all this stuff together before we actually glue up. We don't want to glue anything till we have everything exactly where we want it and how we want it to go. The flow switch, it does have arrows on the top of it if you look to see which way the water flows. If yours don't, just look in there and see which side of the reed switch is going to be closing when the water flows through it. In this configuration right now, the water's flowing from left to right. Alright, now according to the installation instructions manual, when you get this guy, you need at least 12 inches of straight pipe after the flow switch. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm cutting a 12-inch piece of pipe, and then after that piece of pipe we're going to be adding another reducer back down to 1.5 inches and adding one of our sweeping elbows. So now I've got the 12-inch piece of pipe, and right on the back of that I'm putting the 2-inch to 1.5 inch reducer. Basically here all I'm doing is just trying to eye it to see where it's going to end up, how it's going to look once I get everything dry fitted together. So now we're back down to 1.5 inches, so I'm going to cut a piece of 1.5 inches to go into our sweeping L. Alright, so I'm installing that little piece in there. Gonna put on the 1.5 inch sweeping L here. Now I'm just kind of trying to get a measurement to see how long that piece of pipe is going to be to my center L. So I'm going to cut it, fit it in, put our other sweeping L into that one, and then we'll put all this stuff back together, and I'm going to try to get a measurement here to see what this little piece of pipe is going to be. And one thing to consider when if this is your first time doing plumbing like this, is when you're dry fitting all your stuff, make sure your pipes are going together. Make sure your pipes are fitting in together as much as possible, because when you put glue on these guys and they're not, your pipes are going to go further into your couplings and your elbows, and they could end up being short from your dry fit, if that makes sense. Okay, now we got everything dry fitted together, and it looks good the way I want it to. I even put this little piece right here to stabilize the end, because it's a long run here, and I'll eventually put a strap on that to hold it together. Now I'm taking everything back apart, set it on the ground, assembled. We're going to start gluing everything up. I'm using some primer here, and I'm using all-purpose cement for PVC pipe. I'm using a wrench here because I'm too weak to open it by hand. Always make sure you prime these parts. A lot of people think it's not necessary, but I mean, you might as well go the extra mile to do it. Prime everything. It usually takes about, I don't know, a minute or so for this stuff to dry. And then once it's dried, we're going to apply the PVC cement. Now you put these guys on here, don't just slide them on. Turn them a few times, wiggle them back and forth, and make sure that that glue is spread in that joint. and you'll feel it harden up. And we're going to do this with every joint. Now this part here, make sure that that nut is on that piece before you put it on. If you don't, you're going to have to cut it to get it back on there. So make sure it's assembled before you put it on. Again, we're going to prime, let it dry. Then we're going to put this PVC cement on. Again, turning as we put it on and letting it harden up. Now we're going to install the actual sail itself. We're going to prime, let dry, and then use the PVC cement. Always, like I said, turning it when you put them together. This is going to prevent you from having any leaks. Now we're going to put the flow check in to make sure. This is just the valve that make sure that you have flow before it cuts the sail on. And now we're going to put in the 12-inch piece that's required by the installation instructions. I'm gonna go ahead and put this brace underneath here since it's getting kind of long now, but this is how it's gonna eventually hold it up. Now we're gonna go back to our reducer, back down to 1.5 inches. This is where the actual leg's going to stand, is right there, where that stabilizer's going to be. Now I'm just kind of dry fitting this back together, kind of so I can get an idea, make sure everything's still good. I'm going to put the little piece in. I'm going to go ahead and put on the elbow for where it goes back to the inlets for the pool. I'm going to dry fit it again so I kind of get an idea of where this elbow needs to turn to meet up with that one. And then we're going to glue it on and dry fit it to make sure it all still fits good. And tear it back apart. I'm going to glue these two pieces together separate. And I'm going to glue this in here and try to eye it to where it aligns with the other elbow. Now I'm going to glue these two guys. Now this is where it kind of gets tricky. You want to prime it and then glue both ends at the same time. And then when you piece this thing together, you'll turn the pipe as one. So you're kind of turning both joints at the same time. And then there you go, glued up. Now I'm just adding a strap here to this leg that holds this back end up. And one thing I do want to talk about too is make sure you go back and check all your glue joints, make sure they're all good and glued before you put pressure on. I let this thing sit for about 2 to 3 hours before I actually put any pressure on it. I'm just going back through all the parts here, what all we did, and just letting you get a kind of close-up view of it. And one thing I'll talk about is my Polaris pump from my pool cleaner. I haven't hooked it back up yet. There's the pump for it. The inlet valve is going to tie back into all of this right there. So that's where I'm going to hook it back up with the T. Okay, what I'm doing here is I'm wiring into an existing power supply that was here before I bought the house. It went to an old salt cell that was installed prior to me living here. Now, one thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go into showing you how to wire this guy up into your breaker box. The reason being is that if you have any knowledge on how to wire this kind of stuff, you could probably do it yourself without me telling you how to do it. And if you don't, I don't want to be the one to show you how to do it and possibly get yourself hurt or anything like that. So the best idea on this part here would be that if you don't have any experience with electricity or anything like that, would be just to go ahead and mount your box, get everything plumbed up like I did in this video, and then maybe hire somebody to come in and wire it up for you. They wouldn't charge you a lot to do it. It's very easy to do, and it's not a very intensive process. We're using the 220 volt schematic for this guy here, and I'm wiring one 110 volt side to the pin 1, and then the other 110 volt side to pin 4. Then of course it has the jumper in the middle, and it goes back to that schematic that came on the front of the box. One very important thing to remember here is to make sure, if you are doing this yourself, to make sure all your connections are tight. And anytime you're working with electricity, always make sure that your power's cut off and that you have checked with a multimeter that is functioning properly, that all the power is off before putting your hands anywhere near inside this box. So now I've got everything wired up. You can see here I've got my ground lug done. I've got my black wire going to pin 1. Got the white wire going to pin 4, and that's giving us a total of 220 volts, 110 volts per wire. And just like the other part, this is something that I would suggest you do at your own risk. If this is something that you have no knowledge on of how to install, I would definitely hire somebody to install it for you. Okay, basically what I'm doing right here, as you can see, is I'm using a wire to make a bond between our box here and our pump that you can see right here. Now, anytime you have electronic components in a pool system, you have to use what is known as a bonding loop. And basically, all the parts have to be bonded together via common ground. And this is just basically a safety feature that anytime, if there's any kind of short or anything like that, it will trip a breaker and not cause any harm to anybody in the pool. Okay, we're going to hook up the parts now. First thing we're going to do is just hook up the flow sensor, especially this little guy here, and it plugs in right at the bottom. It's hard to mess this one up. But if you read this notice right here, we have to cut this guy on and change our cell to the T15 for what we're using before we plug it in. So I'm gonna cut this guy on now. Alright, in order to do that, we're gonna hit this diagnostics button right here till we get to the cell, which would be that one there, and it is on a T15. So we should be good there. So I'm gonna pull this guy off. If yours wasn't a T15, move this guy up and down until you get to the one that you have. From auto to super chlorinate, and it's gonna just switch back and forth. 3, 5, 9, 15. Pretty easy. Now you can plug in your cell, and it just slides in that little groove right there. Make sure it goes, that right there goes into those little spots. Hope you can see that. Like so. There we go. I'm gonna cut this thing on, see if I got any leaks now. Okay, so I'm gonna recalibrate the salt here now. I got it back running, no leaks, so we're good there. And I'm going to go from off back to auto. I'm going to push this until I get to that there, and it should kick on and give me a readout when it stabilizes. I just put a bunch of salt in here, so it's probably going to give me a false reading for a little while. More than likely what I'm going to do is let this thing run for a little while, and then it will probably stabilize, so we'll come back then. Okay, we're going to try it now. I'm going to flip it to off, back to on. I'm going to go to our parts per million. You hear it click. And once this stabilizes, it's still a little high. I just put 10 bags of salt in my pool, so it's probably going to be high for a little while. But it will lower. It was at 6,500, now it's down to 4,500. Once you get it set to where you want it, move it up and down, and then it should change it on the front to your reading. That's still too high, but at least I'm generating right now. If you want to change your temperatures, you want Fahrenheit or Celsius, you're going to go to your temperature, which is right there. And you're going to move the toggle from auto super chlorinate, and it's going to give you Celsius back to Fahrenheit. That's pretty much it. I'm going to keep checking this thing until I get a good reading and see about where I'm at. Probably every couple hours or so. I might expect that number to come down, so we'll see here in a minute. Okay, so it's been a little while. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this guy off, cut it back on, and we're going to go to our salt and see what we got. 2200. So we're actually a little low now, so I'm going to have to add some more salt to it. Anyways, you get the idea. Just kind of play around with it. Put you about 10 bags in. Let this thing run for a while, and then add accordingly. So there we go. Alright guys, that's about it for this video. My pool is a 20 by 40. Ended up putting right at about 15 bags of salt into the pool to get my rating up to about 3,000 parts per million. Now you can go a little higher than that if you want to, just as long as you're in that range of, I believe it was 2,700 to 3,400, you'll be fine. If you're interested in buying one of these things, I'm going to leave a link in the description down below where you can go to Amazon and buy one like I did. Now just be aware that if you do that, you help my channel out. I will get a little bit of commission off of it if you do buy one from my link below. So I'd really appreciate it. If not, that's fine as well. If you have any questions or comments about anything, just leave them below. Send me an email. However you want to get in touch with me, I'd be glad to help you as much as I can. If you liked the video, give me a like. And if you liked it, please subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.